Chapter 14, from 1824 to 1836, Section 3. Captain Dixon, commander of the Skelton, came to Van Diemen's Land in 1820. On his return to England, he published a small volume on the capabilities of the country. He suggested the formation of a pastoral company, with a capital divided into £100 of shares, as a profitable scheme. Causes foreign to this inquiry reduced the marketable value of money and awakened a speculative spirit in Great Britain. Projects of every kind found favour. A madness fraught with insolvency, fraud and ruin. But in the meantime, the Van Diemen's Land Company had been formed. Men of opulence and prudence, when compared with common projectors, were concerned in its origin. They proceeded with caution and postponed the issue of their share list until their plans were laid. Nor did they promise a dividend, but as the result of a considerable outlay and at a distant date. Yet they drew a brilliant picture of this colony and delineated in vivid language the riches of its soil, its relative position, and its future destinies. Such advantages, said they, could not long escape the penetration of the British public. It was, among their objects, to relieve Great Britain from dependence on foreign wool, to improve the quality of the Australian flocks. This object they have contributed to accomplish. They applied to Lord Bathurst for 500,000 acres of land. By his countenance they obtained an Act of Parliament, under which the charter of their incorporation, on the 9th November, 1825, passed the Great Seal. By this charter they were authorised to employ their capital in cultivation and sheep farming, to lend money on mortgage, and to persons engaged in fisheries, to undertake public works on security of tolls, but they were debarred from banking and commerce. Lord Bathurst consulted Colonel Sorrel. He was favourable to the company, but forewarned them that no large blocks of fertile land remained unlocated. The company received a grant of 250,000 acres, to be taken on the northwest coast, in one square block, bounded by Bass's Strait on the north, on the westward by the ocean, and by a line drawn from shore to shore. After some debate, this land was valued to the company at 2 shillings and sixpence per acre, and the whole quit rent charged was £468, 16 shillings, redeemable at 20 years' purchase for £5,575. In the measurement, 1/4 allowed for useless land. The employment of convicts entitled the company to remission of quit rent at £16 annually each man. Mr. Edward Kerr, at first the secretary of the company, became their agent. Having some time resided in Van Diemen's Land, he had returned to England, where he published a book on the state of the country, remarkable for its clear narrative and sober delineation. The first ship dispatched by the company was the Tranmere in 1826, followed by the Caroline. Some time was lost in selecting the settlement, and Circular Head was chosen. On a closer inspection, the district was not found encouraging. Near the shore, the country is heavily timbered, and the high lands towards the westward were found barren and cold. Mr. Kerr was anxious to bring his line as far possible towards the sun, but the governor held him to the literal agreement, under an impression that the grant was already improvident and excessive. The whole scheme was distasteful to Arthur, a powerful company having interests of its own, whose headquarters were in London, might have been a counterpoise to his influence had it not been pushed to the extremity of an inaccessible country. By the oversight or complaisance of Lord Bathurst, the rule which made the outlay of capital the condition of a grant was not inserted in the covenant. The public works promised by the proprietors were never undertaken, and their establishment was but a larger farm than common. They ultimately obtained several blocks of land, which gave them command of an intervening country of 150,000 acres at Woolnorth, 20,000 at Circular Head, 100,000 at the Hampshire Hills, 100,000 at the Middlesex Plains, 150,000 at the Surrey Hills, and 100,000 at the islands on the coast. The total actual cost, including survey, was 1 shilling 6pence per acre. The operations of the company were conducted on a liberal scale. Artisans were sent out. The proprietors were promised a remission of £16 for men and £200 for women on the quit rent. This was the first encouragement of free emigration to this quarter of the world. A road was opened with Launceston, chiefly useful to absconders. The importation of sheep and horses of great value was beneficial to the country. The sheep of the company cost £30,000 in 1830, when they exported wool to the value of £2,000. The servants of the company left them on the expiration of their engagements, many before. The reports of the proprietors eulogized the management of Mr. Kerr and affirmed that the moral influence he had acquired rendered his government easy and his people contented. They asserted that ardent spirits were excluded. There were no police or prison, and none required. These statements varied from fact. The company provided no religious teaching for its people, and Mr. Kerr, a Roman Catholic, could not be expected to promote heretical creeds. The losses sustained by the company were great. The cold destroyed the stock, and their crops often perished from moisture. On the Hampshire hills, many hundred lambs died in a night. Sometimes the season never afforded a chance to use the sickle. In the morning the crop was laden with hoarfrost, at noon it was drenched with the thaw, and in the evening covered with dews, and thus rotted on the ground. The agent, however, did not despair, and the company anticipated a dividend in 1834 at the latest. The company provided a numerous staff. Beside the agent were a commissioner, an agriculturist, an architect, and surveyors. Its local affairs were confided to a council of 3, Kerr being the chairman. But the divided sovereignty was impracticable, and the potentate of the North, as he was sometimes called, soon reigned alone. Servants engaged in Great Britain at low wages, on their arrival, often escaped from the farms and exposed the agent to great vexation. Sometimes they were pursued and brought back by force. It was at last agreed to cancel their indentures on repayment of the cost of their passage. In 1834, the population on the estate amounted to about 400 persons, of whom more than 200 were prisoners of the Crown. The New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land Establishment, formed at the same time, received a grant of 40,000 acres. They engaged to improve the stock of Van Diemen's Land and introduced valuable horses. Colonel Latour was a leading partner. Captain Thomas, speared by the blacks in 1831, was superintendent of the company's affairs, which however were unprofitable for many years. To these establishments, the colony is indebted chiefly for the introduction of valuable stock. In this, they were rivaled by private settlers. Bulls of the Fifeshire breed were imported by Mr. Patrick Wood of Normandy, by Captain Watson. Saxon sheep were imported by Messrs. Giles from the flock of the Marquis of Londonderry, by Mr. R. H. Harrison, by Mr. Anstey from the flock of Sir Thomas Seabright, by Mr. R. Willis from that of Mr. Henty of Arundel. Many others might be mentioned, but these were in advance of the public companies, and by 1830 little could be added to the varieties of the fold or the stall. Among those employed in the Van Diemen's Land Company's service was Jorgen Jorgenson, whose adventurous life made him remarkable even among vagabonds. He was born at Copenhagen in 1780. After some employment in the coal trade, he accompanied the expedition of Flinders, and afterwards, as mate on board the Lady Nelson, attended the first party to Risdon. Having returned to Europe and become commander of a privateer in the service of his country, he was captured after a smart resistance by the British ships Sappho and Clio. He obtained, while out on his parole, the merchant ship Margaret and Anne to carry provisions to Iceland, where the people were suffering extreme privation. On a second voyage, the governor, Count Tramp, prohibited the intercourse. Jorgensen landed while the people were at church, and aided by his seamen, took the governor prisoner. He then, with extraordinary impudence, issued a proclamation stating that he had been called by an oppressed people to assume the reins of government. He proceeded to reform its various departments. He lightened the taxes, augmented the pay of the clergy, improved the system of education, established trial by jury, formed an army consisting of 8 soldiers, and fortified the harbour with 6 guns. Having performed these exploits, he returned to London in a prize taken from the island. His proceedings were already known to the ministry, and he was arrested as an alien at large. Jorgensen made no small stir by his appearance among legislators and conquerors. After a variety of adventures, in which he was often on the borders of crime, he pawned the linen taken from his lodging and was sentenced to transportation. In Newgate he was employed as a dispenser of medicine. After 4 years' detention he was released, but was retaken, having neglected to quit Great Britain, and transported for life. Such is the account he gave of his imprisonment. The penalty might have been commuted, but he undertook to write on various subjects and created some trouble. He was therefore forwarded to this colony. Here he was chiefly employed as a constable, detected many crimes, and brought several to the scaffold. A woman who had assisted him in discovering certain offenders became his wife, and he was often seen fleeing from her fury through the streets. He, however, survived her, and at length closed his singular career in the colonial hospital. Jorgensen made great pretensions to literature. He wrote a treatise on religion and another on the Treaty of Tilsit. In this country he published a pamphlet on the funded system, and a narrative of his life by himself. With a knowledge of the writer, it is amusing to read the grave strictures of the London critics, who complained that he bounded with amazing rapidity from one subject to another, without leaving a trace of his track. Now among the stars, then on a steam engine chasing infidelity or pelting atheism with meteoric stones. End of chapter 14 being chapter 3, from 1824 to 1836, section 3.